Hello friends, this is Jim with Science Talk. In this story I want to do a follow-up of something I've discussed before, namely Earth's land areas being degraded. Before I do so, allow me to remind you to please subscribe to my channel, to please share my videos with others, hit the bell so you know when I drop a video. Please support the work I do by becoming a patron at patreon.com/Science Talk with Jim Massa. For as little as $3 a month or more if you're so inclined, you will you will get these reports that I share with you, and it is important that people know about what's going on in the world around us. I am also on Steemit. You can find me there as well. 75% of Earth's land areas are degraded. A new report warns that environmental damage threatens the well-being of 3.2 billion people. Okay. Not quite 50% of the total population, but close. More than 75% of Earth's land areas are substantially degraded, which will undermine the well-being of 3.2 billion people. This is according to the world's first comprehensive evidence-based assessment. These lands have become either deserts, are polluted, deforested, or converted to agricultural production, which are also, of course, the main causes for species extinctions. If this trend continues, 95% of the Earth's land areas could become degraded by 2050. That's only 32 years away. That would potentially force hundreds of millions of people to migrate as food production collapses in many places. Now, we are already starting to see climate refugees. People who live in tropical locations where the rise in sea level is basically drowning their island are being forced to flee. The Middle East is estimated, predicted to become totally uninhabitable by 2060. Because it would be simply too hot there for people to survive. So people will be fleeing those regions there. So Sir Robert Watson, who is chair of the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, which produced this report, he states, land degradation, biodiversity loss, climate change are three different faces of the same central challenge: the increasingly dangerous impact of our choices on the health of our natural environment. IPBES, that's the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, is the IPCC for diversity. IPCC is the Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change. It's a scientific assessment of the status of non-human life that makes up Earth's life support system. This study took this assessment study took 3 years, more than 100 scientists from 45 countries performing research. Rapid expansion and unsustainable management of croplands and grazing lands is the main driver of land degradation, causing significant loss of biodiversity, impacting food security, water purification, the provision of energy, and other contributions of nature essential to people. This has reached critical levels in many parts of the world, Dr. Watson said. Wetlands have been hit hardest. 87% lost globally in the last 300 years. 54% have been lost since 1900. Wetlands continue to be destroyed in Southeast Asia, Congo region of Africa, mainly to plant oil palm. Underlying drivers of land degradation, says the report, are the high consumption lifestyles in the most developed economies, combined with rising consumption in developing and emerging economies. High and rising per capita consumption, amplified by continued population growth in many parts of the world, are driving unsustainable levels of agricultural expansion, natural resource, mineral extraction, and urbanization. We've known about this for over 20 years, but it's only getting worse, said Luca Montanarella, a soil scientist from Italy and co-chair of the assessment. Let me introduce a very basic concept here to put this in perspective. Carrying capacity. Carrying capacity is a term used in ecology that is defined as follows. It is the number of organisms, members of a species, that an ecosystem can sustain based on available resources. What are the typical available resources organisms need? Food, that's suited for how they evolved. Water, even desert animals need water, whether they get it from their food or not, but they still need water. And of course, a space to live. So we have increasing human population on a finite land area. So we need to use more land to house people, but more land to grow food. They're kind of butting up against each other. Also, by insisting on growing cattle, as an example, that is less efficient than, say, growing vegetables. For example, because there's a concept of, as we move from trophic level to trophic level, only about 10% or so of whatever energy is available at a certain trophic level, only 10% of that available energy makes it to the next trophic level. So you lose about 90% of it, be it through respiration, defecation, urination, death, what have you. You know, just the fact that when you convert from one energy source to another energy source, it's not efficient. So if I have, say, 100 acres, and I want to raise cattle, I'm going to need much more land to grow fewer heads of cattle. Because I have to first grow the grass, then the grass has to feed the cattle, and so on. I have energy loss. Whereas if I just take that 100 acres or so and grow crops, that's the more efficient use of the land. I will get more pounds or kilograms per acre by growing vegetables than I do growing livestock, because the livestock is higher up in the trophic levels, in the food chain. You need more energy, and not to mention how much water is needed to grow a pound of beef or a kilogram of beef. So if we were to change our practices from, instead of raising cattle, to growing more vegetables, we can actually, for the same amount of land, yield more food. It will go further. It will provide more biomass. And that's what Luca Montanarella is getting at. Land degradation is rarely considered an urgent issue by most governments, even though many have signed an international agreement to reach land degradation neutrality by 2030. I'm sorry to say this, but a lot of times you have many politicians who are clueless on science, scientifically illiterate, and they're making policies where they need to have an understanding of the scientific principles in order to make informed decisions. And quite frankly, they're not. Ending land degradation and restoring degraded land would get humanity 1/3 of the way to keeping global warming below 2 degrees C, which is the target climate scientists say we need to avoid the most devastating impacts of climate change. Deforestation alone accounts for 10% of all human-induced emissions. Not to mention, you no longer have those trees pulling CO2 out of the atmosphere. Forests pull more CO2 out of the atmosphere than do grasslands. For developing regions like parts of Asia and Africa, the cost of inaction in the face of land degradation is at least 3 times higher than the cost of action. And the benefits of restoration are 10 times higher than the cost, this report found. Ending production subsidies in agriculture, fisheries, energy, and other sectors would go a long way to reducing pressure on nature. Roughly 25% of Africa has shifted out of cattle and sheep production simply because it's become too dry and unproductive to be profitable. This is a statement from Robert Scholes, who is a South African ecologist and co-chair of this assessment. These lands are reverting back to wildlife, which are better adapted to those conditions. Same things are happening in Australia. There are many proven approaches to reversing these trends, including urban planning, replanting with native species, green infrastructure development, remediation of contaminated and sealed soils, for example under asphalt, wastewater treatment, river channel restoration. Land needs to be managed at a landscape scale where the needs of agriculture, industry, and urban areas can be balanced in a holistic way, says Dr. Scholes. Now, there's some excellent points there. People living in Las Vegas don't need to be planting Kentucky bluegrass on their front lawns. The water hog. It's not endemic to the region. But if you plant native vegetation that's found in that particular region, you're not only using less water, you're reducing your impact. I just saw a report, and I'll be reporting on this soon, of a study showing that planting trees in urban areas, not only is it nice for aesthetic reasons, but it helps pull down some CO2. It provides shading, which means that the buildings do not heat up as quickly, which means that you don't have to use as much energy to cool the buildings. Better, more open access information on the impacts of traded commodities is also needed, Dr. Scholes adds. Many rich countries, quote-unquote, offshore their environmental impacts by importing huge quantities of food, resources, and products from other countries. The European Union, as an example, imports 30 to 40% of its food. Through this report, the global community of experts has delivered a frank and urgent warning with clear options to address dire environmental damage. And that is a statement from Dr. Watson. So it comes down to a question of, do politicians, do people have the political will to heed the scientists' warnings, to heed the scientists' recommendations? Is there the political will to reverse course, or is it just going to be business as usual? I still come back to the fact that let's be blunt, there are too many people on this planet for the natural resources available. Humans are well above the carrying capacity of what planet Earth can do to sustain. That's just the blunt truth. Dr. Paul Ehrlich wrote a book back in the late 60s, early 70s called The Population Time Bomb, where he basically outlined the problem of resources, human population growth, being, there's too many people and there's not enough resources to sustain all these people, and the system's going to come crashing down. He was ridiculed, he was made fun of, this, that, and the other thing. Well, unfortunately, sometimes it takes 4 decades or so for the "I told you so" moment to arrive, but basically he could probably rightfully so go around saying "I told you so." He warned us back then. Rachel Carson warned us even a decade earlier than Dr. Ehrlich. And like everything else, we don't listen to the experts when we should. So there are dire situations that face humanity. And because there's also the impact on the other ecosystem and the other organisms, flora and fauna, there could be some serious consequences, some serious ramifications happening down the line. Hope you liked this video, found it informative. Please share, please support my work. Thank you.